My name is Eric Jacobson. I'm a board member of the New Jersey Association for Lifelong Learning. And in full disclosure, I'm also a volunteer ESL teacher at Make the Road, New Jersey. And I'm responsible for NGEL's professional development activities. So I design the program for the conference, and I also coordinate the webinar series. And I'm very, very happy that Sarah Cullinane from Make the Road New Jersey is going to be able to speak with us today and answer some questions about what's going on both nationally and in the state, and for us to think together how we as adult educators or people that work in the community can connect what's happening in terms of policy to the work that we're doing with our students and the work that our students are doing themselves out in their communities as activists in their own communities. So before we get started, because there's such a large crowd, I'm going to keep everybody muted except for Sarah and then myself occasionally. But you can still ask questions or make comments. So one way to do that is for me to unmute you. And you can get me to do that by raising your virtual hand. So please go to your control panel on your webinar and see if you can raise your virtual hand. There should be a little icon that you can click on. I see Ashley's hand. Who else's hand do I see? Katya's, Marilyn's, Myrna's, Nina's. I always feel like this is apart from Romper Room where I get to see people out in TV land. Other folks? Okay. Well, hopefully you can discover your hand. The other way that you can either ask a question or make a comment is using the chat section. So I'll be monitoring the chat area as Sarah's making her presentation. So you can either ask me in the chat area to unmute you, or if you have a comment that you would like to share or a question that you'd like to ask, I'll be monitoring that, and then I can ask Sarah those questions or share those comments. So why doesn't everybody go to the chat area and tell me where you're participating from today? Where are you located in New Jersey? And what's the weather like today there? Here in Montclair, it's kind of gloomy. Are you in Elizabeth, Sarah?
I'm in Elizabeth. It is very gray.
Yes, yes. But it's February, so that's okay. You expect February to be gray a little bit.
That is true. Should I start, or what?
Give us a few seconds. I want to make sure that people can find that chat area so that they can ask the questions and make comments as we're going through. So hopefully people are finding it. All right, so some people don't have a chat area, depending upon what operating system you're using. So if you don't have a chat area, just go to the question bar. So I see that some people can find the question bar. So I see Myrna's in Perth Amboy. Phyllis is in lovely downtown New Brunswick. Nina's at East Orange Public Library. Great Falls. Nice. All of their students are listening. Great. I'm glad that your students are with you, Nina. All right. So people can use that question area or the chat area to ask questions, have me unmute you, or add comments. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you all for taking time today for the call for this webinar. I'm really excited to be able. I wish I could be in the same room with you, but this is the next best alternative, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. Looking forward to hearing your questions and sharing some pretty critical updates. So, Eric, if you want to go to today's session slide, that would be great. So, as by way of introduction, again, my name is Sarah Cullinane. I'm the director of Make the Road New Jersey. We're a grassroots immigrant and workers' rights organization based in Elizabeth and Passaic, New Jersey. And today, we're going to be doing a conversation. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the state of immigrant rights nationally, what's been happening at the national level under the Trump administration, what are the key changes to be aware of, And then, and I'll go through a little bit of a timeline that was, to be honest, sort of terrifying to prepare over about the last 2 years. And then I'm going to be doing a look at New Jersey. And I actually think New Jersey is one of the most exciting places in terms of the fight back on immigrant rights and protecting immigrant communities and immigrant communities standing up in the country. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent wins, and that includes policy changes and organizing campaigns, and real changes in how immigration works in New Jersey that will actually, I think, change the lives of immigrants here. And then we'll move on to what's next. Some of the other campaigns happening across the state, and things to be looking out for and other resources to look into. So we'll be taking your questions throughout, as Eric mentioned, and I'll try to stop and respond. And Eric, you should just jump in whenever you're getting questions and whenever it makes sense. I think we'll do after every couple slides or every topic.
Okay.
So if you want to go to the next slide. Great. So just a little bit of background on Make the Road New Jersey. We launched in late 2014. Our mission is to build the power of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and justice. And we do that through community organizing, through legal services and support services, through transformative education, and that includes ESL classes and adult education, and also youth development work and policy innovation. And we are very lucky that Eric Jacobson is our amazing volunteer ESL teacher here in Elizabeth. Every year we engage 10,000 immigrant families in education and legal services. Oh, I'm missing a comma, sorry. Civic participation and leadership development in our community centers that are based in immigrant communities in Elizabeth and Passaic. Our membership is mainly Latino immigrants from working class backgrounds. Large majority are undocumented, but we also have members who are citizens and who have green cards. And so my experience, I'm an attorney, and I'm also speaking from experience as working in a grassroots organization that is building power and trying to transform things from the ground up here in New Jersey. So that's just a little bit about where I'm coming from. If you want to go to the next slide, that's just a nice picture of actually an action that we did on March 5th last year, which is the day that DACA was supposed to end. And these are a group of dreamers. That's me in the corner with the hood on. It was at 1,000-person march. So we did 5 actions across the state. So this is, we take action, we do rallies, we do protests. We also do services and adult education and policy work as well. And we really see change as rooted in employing all of those strategies. So next slide.
I'm going to add one quick thing, which is I think an important aspect of Make the Road New Jersey's work is because it's a membership organization. That means the members, people we would call learners in an adult ESL classroom, are actually deciding the direction of the organization. Right, both in terms of the actions that they're going to take, or the ESL that they want, or other things that they want to do. So, in adult education, for a long time, we've talked about trying to problematize the teacher-student relationship, right? And that teachers and students should be collaborating on the types of works that they're doing. And I think Make the Road is a place where teachers and students are able to kind of talk together to build the program, as opposed to it being kind of a top-down directed thing about what ESL classes are going to be offered, when they're going to be offered, and these types of things. It's really a collaborative effort.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I think a great example of that is a class that Eric taught last year. And the students were working very heavily on this campaign to win driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. We'll talk more about that later. And so they decided to develop a whole curriculum that Eric created around how to convince other people to sign on to petitions and do lobbying around driver's licenses. So they got some great vocabulary and practice, and actually did practiced their English language skills doing petition drives at the train station. So yeah, so we can move to we're on the Trump administration's text. So this is, I just wanted to step back. I think it's, it's been a relentless 2 years under Trump for immigrant communities. We know that deportations escalated under the Obama administration, and in many senses, the Obama administration built many of the systems in place, whether it's your fingerprints being sent to immigration when you're stopped by local police or fingerprinted by local police, or expanding detention. But under the Trump administration, there has been a severe escalation of both anti-immigrant sentiment and also anti-immigrant policy and actions. So I think it's helpful, as painful as it is, to really just step back and review some of the major changes on immigration policy that the Trump administration has put in place. So we can walk through each of them, and we can actually follow up with some additional materials as well if you're interested in diving more deeply into any of them. So I think we all remember that Friday in January 2017 when Trump announced executive orders in his second week of office, first full week of office, that would create a Muslim ban, basically a travel ban on individuals coming to the United States from a group of majority Muslim countries. And in that same week, he also issued an executive order that reprioritized who would be a priority for deportation under current policy. So it used to be under the Obama administration that individuals who had strong ties to the community and no criminal convictions were not a priority for deportation and could actually receive what's called prosecutorial discretion. So that would mean that ICE might come and stop you and you may be undocumented, but that ICE would actually not then try to deport you. Their lawyers would exercise what's called prosecutorial discretion and allow you to stay in the country, sometimes under deferred action, which is a sort of decision by the government not to deport you, and then allows you to have employment authorization document that's renewable. So the Trump administration did away with all of that, and it said that if you are a priority for deportation by being undocumented, that you're a priority if you've ever been stopped or arrested, not even convicted of a crime, not even charged. So that really changed things around, and most crucially, it eliminated the prosecutorial discretion doctrine. So it meant that ICE attorneys now were mandated by their boss, by the Attorney General, by DHS, and then courts run by the Attorney General, to actually actively prosecute all immigration cases. And so that has meant that, and we'll talk about this later, there's not only is ICE out trying to round up and deport more people, there's been a 30% increase across the country in ICE arrests. It also means that people who are longtime residents, who may not have a criminal conviction that is serious, who have children here, are being targeted for deportation. So that's just January. Then in March 2017, the federal government threatens to pull funding from what are called sanctuary cities. New Jersey has 13 of them, and throughout that year, there were a number of threats where the federal government tried to pull grants from cities that were actually following the Constitution by not handing people over to ICE, and that really threatened a lot of cities that were trying to do the right thing by not using their local police, not using their local prosecutors to work for ICE, but rather just following the Constitution and letting people go instead of handing them over to ICE. September 5th, 2017, Trump takes the vicious action of ending DACA. Jeff Sessions announces that the administration will end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which is a program for young people, dreamers, known as dreamers. Sorry, there's a little bit of an echo. And this impacts 800,000 young people Sessions announced that in March of the following year, the program will be over. Fortunately, it's been tied up in litigation. The number of suits have sued, including New Jersey. And for now, anyone who has DACA is still able to renew it. The program still exists, although no one who has yet to apply for DACA will be able to apply. So that's actually 70,000 young people in New Jersey who could apply, who are eligible now, but will not be able to do so. So that's been an extreme source of anxiety and stress, and really negatively impacted almost 1 million, more than 1 million actually, if you count the people who haven't yet been able to apply, young people who've grown up in the United States and their lives. Later that week, the Trump administration, or later that month, the Trump administration announced that it would end temporary protective status for individuals from Sudan, and that was the first of many announcements ending TPS for individuals from Haiti, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Nepal, Honduras, Liberia. And TPS is a program that's existed for more than 20 years, and it's temporary protective status, so it's work authorization that's renewable every couple of years for people who are coming from countries where there's either an extreme natural disaster or war and they can't return. Again, fortunately, the end of TPS has been tied up by litigation. States challenged its end, and immigrant rights organizations, and it will not be ending for many of the countries, but it has been a source of, real terror in communities of people who've been here for decades. If you think about, people fleeing from El Salvador after, I think it was Hurricane Mitch, which was decades ago. People have really built lives here, have homes, have cars, have families, and they would be ordered to leave if this program is ended. An example in January 2018, just an example of sort of the racism and anti-immigrant sentiment that is really underlying all of these policy changes. There was an announcement in the press that, a leak in the press that Trump had called Haiti and countries in Africa, quote, shithole countries. And I think that's an example. I put that in there just to sort of remind us of how these anti-immigrant acts are really rooted in race. You see African countries, Haiti, countries where Black immigrants are coming from being targeted, Muslim immigrants being targeted, racist rhetoric around immigrants coming from Mexico and Central America. And I think that's a real market change over the past couple of years in terms of where our leadership is on immigration. If you want to move to the next slide, Eric.
Before we move on, I did want to spend just a couple minutes about TPS, a couple more minutes about TPS. And I'd really like to hear from people participating in the webinar about this. I feel like within adult ed programs, there was a lot of discussion about how ICE policies, about how kind of ramping up the deportation had a negative impact on the numbers coming into ESL programs. Whether people were in status or out of status, there was kind of a generalized anxiety that was keeping people away from ESL programs. And I'm wondering if some of the people that are on the webinar have anything to say about how TPS and the sort of anxiety around the removal of TPS has impacted their programs. So if you work with folks from, Haiti or Nepal or, Honduras or Nicaragua, like within your programs, within the students that you work with, did you see, TPS really dramatically impacting the number of people coming through your door and kind of what they were experiencing? So Nina points out that they have a lot of students from Haiti in our class, right? That's one of the first countries that I thought of that this anxiety around TPS would really impact the Haitian community and the ESL provision within that community. And Sarah, maybe while people are writing, is your sense, my sense is that the TPS did not get nearly the same type of media coverage that DACA did or some of the Muslim ban did. Do you think that's the case, or do you think people really understand what TPS is?
I think it's mixed. On Tuesday, there was a huge mobilization in Washington, D.C. on TPS, and we saw thousands of people going out, even in the middle of a snowstorm. And there's been several pieces of legislation introduced, some bipartisan, to extend a pathway to permanent status for TPS holders. But I do think you're right that, one, because the end was sort of rolled out by country, and it wasn't that the program ended immediately. It was like announced in 2017 that certain programs would end in 2020. And then I think also so that made it a little bit more fractured. I think also the sort of Dreamer movement was newer and more organized. The DACA passed in 2012. The DREAM Act, people have been organizing for the DREAM Act for years. I think organizing around TPS had not been as robust, but has quickly caught up, and there's a very strong coalition here in New Jersey. We can share information if people want to get involved in the TPS coalition.
Yeah, that'd be great. Raise your virtual hand if you feel like you have a good sense of TPS and how it impacts students in your programs. Okay. Not lots of hands going up, just a few. So I think we do need to circulate some more resources about what TPS is and how it would impact people. After the webinar is over, everybody will be getting a PDF of the PowerPoint, and at that point we can also add some other resources about things like TPS organizing.
Okay, great. And so, there are 10,000 TPS holders in New Jersey. So it is not an insignificant number. Okay, so we're only in January of 2018 and already things are pretty terrible. That same month, ICE had announced that its arrests had increased, and I'm sorry, I think I said 38% nationally since Trump took office. So that's a really large increase in ICE arrests, especially since under the Obama administration, it was not a small amount. Fast forward to last summer, I'm sure everyone remembers the family separation crisis at the border, a new zero tolerance policy in which the Trump administration is both prosecuting immigrants who are coming across the country and separating families in an attempt to terrorize immigrants who are fleeing violence in Latin America, and some misguided attempt in deterring people and really truly horrific attempt to deter people from coming through the border by taking children, putting them in cages, and separating them from their parents. We know that 3 children died as a result. We actually are representing the family of a toddler who died after leaving ICE custody. Her name is Maria Juarez. She was detained before she turned 2 years old at an ICE detention center in Texas, and was given negligent medical care, released to her family in New Jersey, and had such a horrible infection that she passed away before she could get good enough medical treatment. Tens of thousands of children were separated from their parents. There are still children now who have not been able to be reunited with their families, and that began, I think, began another round of fight back in terms of how people were responding to those attacks. But it also, I think, dug in the federal government on their anti-immigrant stance. And so we not only see children being separated from their parents at the border, we also see avenues for relief, including longstanding asylum law being completely gutted by Attorney General Sessions. So in July of 2018, Attorney General Sessions issued a new guidance that revoked decades-old guidance on or asylum law. It used to be that you could get asylum if you were a survivor of domestic violence or feared persecution because of gang activity in your home country. And Attorney General Sessions, then Attorney General, revoked that and issued a new guidance instructing immigration officers not to consider claims of asylum. And it's no coincidence, many people fleeing Central America were claiming asylum based on gang-based claims. And there was a very famous case of a Guatemalan woman who had been able to sort of establish the domestic violence sort of claim for asylum. And so this is also another targeted attempt by the administration to push back on immigration, on people fleeing violence from Central America. In October, the Trump administration pushed to change the public charge rule, and this is really an attempt to crack down on immigrants who are trying to legalize their status. So when you apply to get a green card, you have to undergo what's called a public charge review. And so if you're considered a public charge, that might mean that you are very low income, that you could be at risk of relying on public benefits. And so the federal government can reject your application, or immigration can reject your application for a green card based on public charge grounds. So it used to be that if you're that using certain public benefits like emergency Medicaid or other types of assistance that are not cash-based would not deem you a public charge. The idea there being that undocumented immigrants and immigrants with non-permanent statuses are eligible for emergency Medicaid, and that's for a reason. People should be able to have access to health care. I mean, they should always have access to health care, but our federal government has decided that at least in emergency situations, people should have access. And so what the Trump administration did was change the rules after the fact so that anyone that had previously used any of these benefits, non-cash assistance benefits, would be considered a public charge and never be able to legalize their status. So this is an attack on the poor. It's an attack on immigrants. It's also an attack on U.S. citizen children of immigrant families, because as soon as this proposed rule was announced, thousands of families, millions of families stopped using public benefits that they were eligible for, that their children were eligible for, mainly out of fear that it may hurt their chances at getting a green card one day. That rule has not taken effect yet, but and there was an enormous outcry and several lawsuits. But it's another move by the Trump administration to crack down on people who are trying to regularize their status. And then finally, we have. Oh, go ahead.
This is something that NJOL was quite concerned about, and we actually circulated a letter and a call for advocacy on this issue, because even though the proposed change says that education would not count, people are anxious about the precedent that it sets and where it might go, or the perception on the part of students that going for ESL, going for ABE, going for your GED would put you in danger of being deemed a public charge. Nick's on the webinar. Nick, I'm going to unmute you. Nick, do you want to say anything more about that? Because Nick, you had done a lot of work in this area.
Not really. I think you pretty much captured the essence of the rule. There were literally tens of thousands of responses, and we will hear soon as to what the final outcome of that whole issue is. So ultimately, the federal government will issue a revised rule. Presumably, they will take into consideration the comments that were submitted, but we'll see if the initial rule is relaxed in any way. Don't hold your breath.
Okay. And I think one of the issues here is, again, not just what the letter of the law is, but the perception of how that's going to be used, right? So that even if you're not at risk of having this negatively impact upon you, if you think it might, then you're not going to go get your ESL class. You're not going to go, take advantage of other offerings that an adult education center may be offering. So community-based organizations, city organizations that are providing services to immigrants may see drops in immigrants coming through the door if they understand the public charge rule as being putting them in danger of not being able to regularize their status. So Nick will keep sending out stuff from NJOL as we hear more about this.
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Great. And I think many of you actually filled out, we did a survey for service providers and educators about how both the increase in ICE arrests and also changes to immigration law are impacting people's use of services. And so we're actually going to be putting out a report soon on that, and we'll share that back with you all as well. I think we're always curious to hear, if you're seeing a chilling effect from any of these particular announcements in your classes, with your students. Please feel free to reach out. I think it's really important to document this. It's one way that we can help push back. I'll just end with, the sort of most recent, which has been an ongoing anti-immigrant policy, which is the Trump administration's, attempts to win support and funding for a border wall. And obviously, Trump shut down the government in December over that, and today has announced a state of emergency to build the border wall, which is, both incredibly misguided and harmful for families on the border, for the environment, and has also just become a symbol of anti-immigrant hatred. I will just add that, part of this debate around the border wall has also included more funding for increased detention beds, expanding private immigration prisons, which is now where the majority of immigrants are being held, in for-profit private prisons, and also expanding funding for ICE and Border Patrol officers, both on the border and in our communities here in New Jersey and across the country. And so while the border wall gets a lot of attention, I think we should also be paying attention to what funding deals are getting brokered. For example, last night, the Senate and the House of Representatives both approved a funding deal to keep the government open that largely, I would say, capitulated to the Trump administration's agenda. It would provide $1.3 billion for a border wall and increased funding for deportation and 5,000 new detention beds. So I think that's something we should really pay attention to. Of course, the wall is sort of the big symbol, but I think looking at what's going on, in the budget, who's getting funded, where, that's how deportations expand, is when ICE has more funding. And we will share information, but I think on Monday we're going to be doing an action to protest that and the Trump emergency declaration. So we could go to the next slide. That's just actually an action on TPS that we did, and on the Clean Dream Act, some of our members in Washington, D.C. And now I just wanted to zero in. We can go back onto the next slide. So, just these are all the federal policies. How are they actually taking effect, or how are they impacting New Jersey? And you all can share with me, what you're hearing, but just in terms of the numbers. So again, there are 22,000 DACA recipients in New Jersey who've had their lives put on hold, and then 70,000 more who are eligible but never got to apply, who are basically stuck in limbo. If the DACA program reopens, they can get a work authorization, but right now they're undocumented and subject to deportation. Again, these are people who've been here since before they were 16 years old, have gone to school and graduated in New Jersey. 10,000 TPS recipients here in New Jersey who are vulnerable to deportation, although that has been held up in the courts. It's still extreme vulnerability. In New Jersey, there was a 42% increase in immigration arrests in Trump's first year of office. So that actually is higher than the national average, and we've attributed that to the very aggressive Newark field office for ICE that has been doing, restoring workplace. I shared arrests have been happening in the courthouses, through the criminal justice system, outside of schools, in homes, in the workplace, really scooping up anyone that has an old deportation order. People have been here 20, 25 years. So that's been pretty horrible. And up until this year, 2/3 of immigrants who are detained on civil immigration charges, so immigrants who were arrested by ICE and held in detention in New Jersey, they had to fight their case without a lawyer. And when you don't have a lawyer and you're fighting your deportation case, you only have a 14% chance of winning. The government is always represented by a government lawyer, and most immigrants who are detained and facing deportation in New Jersey do not have a lawyer. That is changing, and we'll talk about some of those changes. But on to the next slide. All of these policies have had a really harsh impact on immigrants' lives. We see an extreme fear of going to court. People are afraid to go file for a restraining order or be a witness in a case, or to seek, to show up at their own court appearance when they're seeking justice. Again, the public charge rule has meant that there are fears of accessing public benefits for U.S. citizen children. Anecdotally, we've heard in Elizabeth and Passaic, there's been a decline in enrollment in Head Start programs. Passaic County College had a decline in enrollment in their college. We'd love to hear from you all if you're hearing similar declines in enrollment or fears. And up until, I think, last year, New Jersey really had not protected immigrants sufficiently. So this is on to the next slide. There had been cuts in ESL classes. You all can tell me more about that. Cuts in legal services, no access to health insurance for undocumented immigrants or lawful permanent residents who've been here for their first 5 years. Unlike other states, no access to state financial aid until now. And until now, there was an extremely active collaboration between ICE and the state. We had an example last year. A man called me. He had gone in to renew his business license. He was undocumented and had a business license to run a used clothing store. The detective that ran his information, or the staff person that ran his information and fingerprints to renew the license, saw an old ICE warrant, called a detective, who then brought ICE in to the local police department and arrested the man. So this is, really close collaboration between police and ICE that is thankfully about to change. But I think, another way that New Jersey, being one of the states with the highest immigrant populations, had really not protected or stood up to defend immigrant rights.
There's a question from Nina, and some of her students are wondering if the Miranda warning applies to arrests by ICE on immigration charges.
That's a great question. So there is a case called Oliva Ramos in the Third Circuit. I guess it's a short answer. It's a complicated answer. The short answer is yes, there have to be Miranda warnings, but the same Fourth Amendment protections. So if ICE comes in, without a warrant and collects evidence, or doesn't read you your rights and collects evidence, you can still challenge that in court, but you have to prove that ICE's violations are egregious and widespread. You can't just say, oh, they forgot to read me their Miranda rights, so we should then not, the government should try not to deport me. So that's not a very clear answer, but the answer is sort of like yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, they're supposed to do it, but if they don't do it, will there be a big problem? And the answer is unfortunately, no.
Related to that, I would encourage everybody to get their hands on these little cards that can fold up into your wallet, that people can give to ICE officers or other police officers that say, I know my rights. These are my rights. I may not be comfortable speaking in English, but I'm giving this card to you in English that lets you know that I know what my rights are. And if you haven't seen those little wallet-sized cards, we can have a link at the end of the webinar to access those as well, because I think that's really, really crucial that students and immigrants and just citizens don't walk around knowing what their rights are, and whatever resources we can give them to make them feel a little bit more at ease when they're dealing with authorities, I think it's really, really important.
Definitely. And we can help provide curriculum also if you want to do know your rights in your classes, or if you want to attend a train the trainer. We can share that as well, because that's very important. So if we can move on to do we want to take more questions, or should we move on to the next?
I think we can move on to the next. And if people have questions, they can, type them in and I can pass them along to you.
Great. So I do want to, that was pretty bleak assessment of where things are. I think that there has been an enormous amount of hope at the state level. And I wanted to share 4 big wins that immigrant rights groups won in New Jersey last year. So we could go on to the next slide. And I think the idea here is just that, the federal government may be incredibly anti-immigrant, but there's a lot our states can do to stand up and fight back. And immigrants organized in New Jersey and were able to win a lot in this past year. So the first big win, and you guys may have seen some coverage of this yesterday because the sort of enrollment statistics just got shared, but Dreamers have been fighting for decades to get access to education, higher education in New Jersey. And so in 2013, they won access to in-state tuition. They used to be charged as international students. And these are young people who've grown up here and graduated from high school here, but who are undocumented or who have DACA. After lots more organizing and after, we had a new governor come into office, Governor Murphy, who ran on a campaign where he supported this issue. Dreamers were able to win financial aid, in-state financial aid for all financial aid programs in New Jersey run by HESA. That was signed into law in May, and the new application went up right away. And it's for anyone who's done at least 3 years of high school in New Jersey and graduated or gotten a GED or equivalent, and for any public or private college in New Jersey. That makes our law stand out. You can use it at any college in New Jersey. You have to meet income guidelines, of course, like anyone else who's applying for financial aid. And more than 500 students have gotten aid this year. And we actually set up a website to help teach people about how to apply, and we run application sessions and are happy to host one if you have any students or if your students' kids are interested in applying. And it's njfordreamers.com, and that link is there, and we'll share it with you. So that was a really exciting win. The people who are in this picture, many of the young people in this picture are in college because of that law, and would not have been able to go otherwise.
I think it's really important that this is shared widely, because I'm imagining there's a lot of students that are in ABE, GED programs who are undocumented, or DACA, and may not know that they have the ability to now apply for financial aid, as they're transitioning into college. So I think this is something that adult educators really have to push out to make sure that they know that their learners that can apply for this.
Definitely. And there's no age limit. It does mean if you just arrived in the country and you didn't go to high school here, you're not going to be able to apply. You have to have done 3 years of high school in New Jersey and graduated. But, we have a lot of folks who are in their 30s who always wanted to go to college, but couldn't. And they graduated from high school or got their GED and did 3 years of high school in New Jersey, and now they're able to apply. So, knowing that you all are working with a lot of adult learners, just, keep that in mind. Okay, pilot universal representation program. So before I'd said that there were a lot of, most two out of every 3 New Jersey immigrants who'd been detained. And I should say sometimes U.S. citizens get wrongfully detained by immigration and still have to fight their case without a lawyer. So the vast majority of people detained in New Jersey did not have a lawyer. And another campaign came together that we worked on to try to get universal representation. So basically the right to a lawyer, a publicly funded lawyer, if you were detained by immigration and unable to pay for your own lawyer. And programs like that exist in New York and to a certain degree in California and in a couple of other cities in the country. But New Jersey last year put $2.1 million into the state budget, and that has resulted in a new pilot universal representation program. So, we think this is a $15 million program. There are more than 2,000 immigrants detained every year who don't have a lawyer. So this is not, this doesn't now mean that everyone who's detained will get access to an attorney, but it does mean that probably several hundred will this year. And the way the program works is that if you're detained and facing deportation, there are now 4 different legal service providers that are inside the detention center screening people for, screening people and taking cases. And they are taking cases until they're full. And so they're trying to create a sort of public defender style program where it's not like you have to call to get a lawyer. It's like that the lawyers are actually there in the jail taking on cases. And we are going to be sending out an action alert later this or early next week because we're trying to increase funding for next year so that we can get closer and closer to universal representation. And we'll also follow up with that as well. And as I mentioned before, New Jersey, or rather private immigration prisons are on the rise again. This is maybe some of you were there, this is the June 30th Families Belong Together rally in Newark. And just around the time of the family separation crisis, New Jersey decided to divest from its pensions and public funds from private immigration prisons as a way of sort of sending a message that they were not going to be collaborating in any way with the detention of families in private prisons at the border. Of course, we still have a private detention center here in New Jersey in Elizabeth, but this is one step to really push back on the dramatic growth of private immigration prisons. And then the last victory, which I think is, I think one of the most exciting. So in November, the Attorney General announced an immigrant trust directive. Previously, as I'd mentioned, in New Jersey, the police collaborated incredibly closely with ICE. They were required by law to turn people over to ICE if they were stopped, not convicted, but stopped and arrested for a DUI or any indictable offense. And that meant that there was incredible fear of interacting with the police, and also that many, many, many people got filtered into the deportation pipeline through interactions with local law enforcement. There had been incredible campaigns, civil disobedience rallies, reports showing how this hurt New Jersey's economy, New Jersey's families, U.S. citizen kids. And in November of this year, Attorney General Gurbir Grewal announced, actually, right then, that's a picture of him after the announcement. He did it right next to the trains that took people to Ellis Island, I think, or where people got off from the boat to Ellis Island. This incredible directive that restricts when local law enforcement can interact with ICE, when prosecutors can interact with ICE, when any type of state law enforcement can interact with ICE. And it basically prohibits police, prosecutors from asking anyone their immigration status. It prohibits them from sharing information with immigration. And it prohibits them from allowing immigration to set foot in the jails or in the court, or not in the court, sorry, in the jails. It used to be that immigration had basically set up, they're like camped out inside, for example, the Union County Jail, and that no longer is the case. It also prohibits police and law enforcement and prosecutors from holding people for ICE or notifying ICE that they're in the jails. There are a few exceptions for people who are charged with crimes of a certain severity, and we actually think that those exceptions are problematic because oftentimes people are charged with crimes and then, you may be exonerated, charges may be dropped, and it doesn't allow you your day in court to fight it because you've already been transferred into ICE custody. But anyways, barring that, this is a really incredible step that folks should learn a lot about. And the Attorney General is hosting with county prosecutors forums across the state, and has set up this really cool website called nj.gov/trust, and it has videos in probably more than a dozen languages, including English if you want to use it for your class. That there are sort of interactive videos that show how this new directive will work. So I really encourage you to check those out and play them for your students and share that information. There's also some very helpful one-pagers. So I think that's sort of the best way to find out information. And the other thing I would just share with everyone is that the directive is actually taking effect in March, and so we won't have information about how state officers and others are complying until then. And one final really sort of amazing thing is that a lot of New Jersey jails still collaborate with ICE. They use a program called 287G, which basically deputizes officers as immigration officers, and allows the jails to detain people and send them to immigration immediately without even having to call immigration. Basically, the local officers are ICE. And so this directive is going to basically, after each of these agreements ends, they're like renewable annually or biannually, the AG will review them and decide whether they are allowed to continue. And what he said to us in a recent community forum is that he doesn't see any reason why any of these agreements should continue. So anyways, lots to unpack there, but again, I would just check out that website. In terms of what's next, we have still a very large campaign to win access to driver's licenses for immigrants in New Jersey. There are 500,000 potential drivers in New Jersey who are undocumented and therefore unable to gain access to a license. And for the past 5 years, New Jersey has been introducing legislation, and we have a really strong bill now that has very strong protections for immigrants and their privacy. And we really encourage you all to check out the website, Let's Drive NJ. It has some great materials, great social media, and that's the sort of big campaign. It's 80 organizations. Feel free to join if you want to join, your organization wants to join. We're always looking to recruit more members. And you can check that out at letsdrivenj.org. I would say that is sort of the big next campaign. It's the issue that gets our members out of bed in the morning, marching in Trenton in the freezing cold, and also keeps them up late at night worrying about whether they'll be detained, dropping their kids off at school, or trying to get to work because they don't have a license.
When we send out the PDF and the email follow-up, I'll also add the link to a PDF of the ESL things I worked on with my students at Make the Road about the driver's license, so people can get access to that too.
Yeah, that is a really terrific curriculum.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if we can. Is it on the website already? I think it is.
Maybe, I'm not sure. We can make sure that it is.
Okay. Okay, great. So, you know, I would encourage you all to just sign up for our mailing list at maketheroadnj.org. And follow us. Our social media is way better than our website. Our website has not been updated in a very long time, so we're much more active on social media. So we will be sending around all of our campaign alerts, and we have them always in English and Spanish. Please share with your students, and if you want to get more involved in the campaigns, feel free to reach out. And we also have weekly organizing committee meetings in Passaic and Elizabeth. In Passaic on Wednesday nights and in Elizabeth on Thursday nights, and a new workers' rights committee that's meeting on Mondays in Elizabeth. So if any of your students want to get involved in the fight for immigrant rights here in New Jersey, we encourage you to share information, and I'm happy to follow up with more flyers as well. Are there any questions that we want to take?
Yeah, so it's near the top of the hour, but so we have time for a few questions, or even if we can't answer the questions now, let us know and we can try to get back to them. For example, I think Nina had suggested earlier to create a one-pager or a handout that explains TPS, particularly for Haitian students. If we can get one in English and Creole, for them it was really the first time they were trying to understand what TPS was and how it impacted them. So hopefully we can get some sort of resource and circulate a resource about TPS in language that would be accessible to students. So if there's other resources like that you would like either Angel or Make the Road to circulate or for us to collaborate on, you can either let us know through contacting us via our email account, which is angelmail@gmail.com. Or if you've got ideas right now, before we wrap up, you can use the question area to suggest things that we should follow up on, either each organization or collaboratively. And I will say, I think, was it last year, I think Make the Road came to the Angel conference and was able to answer some of these questions directly, and that was very, very helpful. So other thoughts or questions that folks have? Sarah, thank you for presenting today.
Thank you all so much, and thank you for all of your work. I wish, again, we could be in person, but it's been great connecting with you all. And thank you, Eric, for making this happen.
Yeah, Nina says thanks and that her class really enjoyed the presentation. Nina, thanks for making it available to your class. I think it's really, really great. You know, there's nothing about us without us, right? So if we're trying to support and help adult learners, they need to be part of the process as well, and not just us speaking on their behalf. Let's see, there's not a question, but Ashley says that she advised a Dreamer Student Club at Brookdale Community College, and that membership in the club by students has increased noticeably this year despite the fear of being spread by our federal government. That's great to hear that there's a Dreamers Club at BCC. Do you know if there's?
I know them well, and they won. They were a big part of winning this new law for financial aid, and are doing really incredible work.
So good work on you, Ashley, and your students there at BCC. Okay. Yeah, Ashley says they're amazing. Yeah, all the young kids are great. The kids are all right. The kids are really all right. Other last thoughts? I'd like to thank everybody for participating as well. And again, if you've got ideas for a webinar that you would like to lead or that you would like Angel to lead and set up, let us know. We've got this resource. We've got this webinar resource that we'd like to take advantage of it as much as possible. And we think of it as kind of like a community resource. So we're not shy about letting other organizations piggyback onto the platform. So if there's something that you'd like to do that would involve a webinar and it seems to fit with the Angel's priorities, let me know and we can work something out. All right. So I'll be sending out emails to everybody that participated. Follow Angel at we do have a nice new website, actually. Our communications group has done a lot of work on reorganizing the Angel website, so it looks really nice. But you can also send us emails, and then here's the information again for Make the Road, but you'll get this in the PowerPoint when you get it. All right. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of the weekend and keep up the good work, everybody.